You're watching Dark Terror Files, where the stories aren't just told, they linger. Where are you listening from? Alone in your room? Driving through the dark? Drop a comment. I want to know who's out there. The snow crunched under my boots as I pulled into the gravel lot of Dunmere Funeral Chapel, a hulking Gothic relic from the 1800s that looked like it was sinking into the earth. Upstate New York in February 2024 was a frozen hell, snowdrifts piled against rusted factory gates, streetlights flickering like they were on their last breath. Dunmere was a town the world forgot. The kind of place where opioid clinics outnumbered diners, and the only thing thriving was gossip about cursed land. I'd driven 3 hours from Syracuse to start my new job as a mortician, thinking it'd be quieter than my old life as a firefighter. No flames, no screams, just silence. I was wrong. The chapel loomed ahead, its brick facade stained black from decades of coal smoke. A single light glowed above the entrance, buzzing like a trapped fly. I grabbed my duffel bag from the truck, my breath clouding in the air, and pushed through the oak doors. The lobby smelled of stale coffee and wax polish, with faded portraits of stern-faced founders staring from the walls. A bell jingled faintly, and Mr. Hargrove, the manager, shuffled out from a back office. He was in his late 60s, a chain-smoking Vietnam vet with a face like weathered leather and eyes that didn't blink enough. Everhart, right? His voice was gravelly, like he'd gargled ash. He didn't shake my hand, just jerked his thumb toward a staircase. Cold Room B's downstairs. That's where you'll spend most of your time. I nodded, following him down a creaking spiral staircase to the basement. The air grew colder with each step. Not just winter cold, but something sharper, like the night my house burned down with Lily inside. I was a firefighter then, supposed to save people, but I couldn't save my own daughter. 8 years old, gone in a blaze I still smell in my dreams. This basement felt like that night hollow, suffocating, wrong. Hargrove stopped at a steel door with a keypad lock, its paint chipped to reveal rust. Above the keypad was a steel plaque, words etched deep enough to look like scars. Cold Room B, he said, tapping the plaque. Read the rules before you go in. Follow them, always. His eyes locked on mine, and for a second, I saw something like fear flicker in them. I shrugged it off. 12 years as a mortician had taught me old-timers loved their ghost stories. I wasn't here for superstition. I was here to work, to bury the past with the dead. The door hissed as it opened, and the cold hit me like a slap. It wasn't just the temperature, it was heavy, like the air itself was watching. The room was sterile, all stainless steel and fluorescent lights, with 6 freezer units lined against the wall. The plaque gleamed under the glare, its rules staring back like a warning I didn't yet understand. I told myself it was just a job, but deep down, in that frozen pit, I felt Lily's absence sharper than ever, like she was still trapped somewhere in the cold. Hargrove stood in Cold Room B, his cigarette-stained fingers tracing the steel plaque like it was a holy relic. The rules were carved in precise, blocky letters, worn at the edges as if someone had tried to claw them away. He read them aloud, his voice low and deliberate, like he was reciting a prayer he didn't believe in anymore. Rule 1, never speak the names of the dead. He glanced at me, eyes narrowing, not even a whisper. They hear it. I raised an eyebrow, leaning against a freezer unit. The metal was so cold, it burned through my jacket. What? They're gonna sit up and complain. Hargrove didn't laugh. Rule 2. Keep the lights bright after 11 p.m. No dimming. No shadows. Rule 3. Close the freezer units in numerical order 1 through 6. No exceptions. Rule 4. Never work in here alone. Rule 5. Don't open a sealed body bag. Rule 6. Never play the AM radio. And Rule 7. Never take personal items from a corpse. I snorted, folding my arms. Sounds like my grandma's ghost stories. What's next? Don't step on cracks. Hargrove's jaw tightened. He stepped closer, close enough I could smell the nicotine on his breath. You're new, Everhart, so I'll let that slide. But this isn't Syracuse. Dunmere's different. This room's different. Break these rules, and you'll wish you were back pulling bodies from fires. I held his gaze, skeptical but rattled. The cold was getting to me, seeping into my bones like it did that night 10 years ago, when I stood outside my burning house, screaming Lily's name into the smoke. I shook the memory off, forcing a smirk. Fine. Rules noted. Can I get to work now? He handed me a clipboard with the day's intake log, 2 bodies. Both elderly, natural causes. Start with these. Stay out of trouble. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. And Everhart, that chill you're feeling. It's not the freezers. It's this place. It remembers. The door clanged shut, leaving me alone in cold room B. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, too bright, like they were trying to drown something out. I glanced at the plaque again, the rules staring back like a challenge. Superstition, I told myself. Just small-town nonsense from a town that had been dying since the factories closed. But as I opened the first freezer unit, the cold hit me again, not just temperature, but something deeper, like the room was holding its breath. I thought of Lily, her laughter at the county fair, her tiny hand in mine. The cold felt like that night, like the moment I realized I'd never hold her again. I pushed the thought down, grabbed my tools, and got to work. Whatever this place was, I wasn't afraid of it. Not yet. My first night shift at Dunmere Funeral Chapel was supposed to be routine. Just me, a couple of bodies, and the hum of the freezers in cold room B. Hargrove had warned me not to work alone, Rule 4, etched into that damn steel plaque. But I wasn't about to let small-town ghost stories scare me off. 12 years as a mortician, I'd seen it all. Bloated corpses, grieving families, the occasional open casket disaster. Nothing rattled me anymore, or so I thought. The room was colder than it should have been, even for a morgue. The fluorescent lights buzzed like angry wasps, casting harsh shadows on the stainless steel. I was prepping an elderly woman, Jane Doe. According to the log, her skin waxy under my gloved hands. The clipboard said natural causes. Nothing special. I set up my tool scalpel, forceps, a jug of formalin, and tried to ignore the way the cold seemed to press against my chest, like it was squeezing out memories I'd buried deep. Lily's face kept flashing in my mind. Her laughter at the county fair, the way she'd tug my sleeve to show me her cotton candy. I shook it off, focusing on the stitches. Then the radio in the corner, a dusty old thing that looked like it belonged in a 1970s diner, crackled to life. I froze. I hadn't touched it. Rule 6. Never play the AM radio. Static hissed. Then a woman's voice, soft and deliberate. Cut through. Miles, my name. Clear as day. My heart slammed against my ribs. I lunged for the radio, fumbling with the dial until the static died. Silence flooded back. But it wasn't empty. It felt like the room was holding its breath, waiting. I turned back to the body, my hands shaking now. That's when I saw at a corner of something sticking out of the body bag's pocket. I shouldn't have looked. Rule 5. Don't open a sealed body bag. But this wasn't sealed. Not completely. The zipper was caught, leaving a gap. I tugged it open just enough to pull out a crumpled Polaroid. My breath caught. It was Lily, my Lily, smiling in her red jacket at the Onondaga County Fair, her eyes bright under a summer sky. 10 years ago, she'd been dead 10 years. My fingers went numb. The photo slipping to the floor. The lights flickered, just for a second, and the cold tightened around me like a fist. I told myself it was a coincidence, some sick prank. But deep down, I knew this place was wrong, and I was alone in it. I didn't sleep that night. The Polaroid was in my pocket, burning a hole through my thoughts. I kept seeing Lily's face, hearing her laugh, then hearing that voice on the radio saying my name. By morning, I was back in Cold Room B, telling myself I'd imagined it. The plaque on the wall glared at me. Rule 4 scratched up like someone had taken a knife to it. Never work alone in Cold Room B. Hargrove's words echoed. This place remembers, and I cursed myself for not listening. I checked the security footage from last night, hoping for answers. The chapel's ancient camera system was grainy, but it showed Cold Room B clear enough. Me at the table, the radio crackling. Then, nothing. No voice. No movement. Just me jumping like a scared kid. But as I rewound, I noticed something else. A faint shadow in the corner, near freezer unit 3. It wasn't there when I'd worked. I played it again, frame by frame. The shadow moved. Just a flicker, like someone standing just out of sight. Then I heard it a soft tapping, like fingernails on metal, coming from inside Unit 3. I froze, my pulse hammering in my ears. The freezers were locked, the bodies logged. Jane Doe 1 was in Unit 2, the other in Unit 4. Unit 3 was empty, or it should have been. I grabbed the log, double-checking. Nothing. The tapping grew louder, rhythmic, insistent. I forced myself to walk over, my boots echoing on the tile. The handle was ice cold, even through my gloves. I yanked it open, empty. Just a steel slab, gleaming under the lights. But the tapping didn't stop. It was coming from behind the unit now. From the wall itself. I slammed the door shut and backed away, my breath clouding in the air. The plaque caught my eye again. The scratched up Rule 4 looking fresh, like it had happened overnight. I told myself it was the building settling. Maybe pipes in the walls. Dunmere was old, falling apart like the rest of the town. But as I locked up and headed upstairs, the tapping followed me, faint, like a heartbeat. That night, in my rented apartment above the shuttered hardware store, I dreamed of Lily. She was in Cold Room B, knocking on a freezer door, her voice whispering, "Daddy, let me out." When I woke, the Polaroid was on my pillow. I hadn't taken it out of my pocket. I hadn't touched the Polaroid since I found it on my pillow, but I could feel it in my jacket pocket, heavy as a stone. Cold Room B was starting to get under my skin, but I wasn't ready to admit it. I'd spent a decade stitching up corpses and burying my grief. Dunmere wasn't going to break me. That morning, I came in early, determined to stick to routine. The chapel was quiet, the snow outside muffling the world. Hargrove wasn't in yet, which suited me fine. His warnings about the rules felt like static in my head, drowned out by the memory of that voice on the radio saying my name. The intake log listed a new body, dropped off overnight by the county coroner. No ID tag, just a scribbled note. Male, 40s, unidentified, suspected overdose. I frowned. Dunmere was no stranger to overdoses. Half the town was hooked on something, but the missing tag was sloppy. Rule 5 nagged at me. Do not open a sealed body bag. The bag wasn't sealed, though, the zipper half open like an invitation. I told myself I just needed to confirm the identity. Log it properly. My hands moved before my brain could argue, pulling the zipper down. The face stopped me cold. Tom Callahan, my old firefighting partner from Syracuse. His skin was gray, lips cracked. But it was him, same crooked nose, same scar above his left eyebrow from the night we pulled a kid from a burning trailer. Tom died 10 years ago in a warehouse fire. One I'd botched. I'd misread the smoke, sent him in too deep. His screams still woke me some nights, right after Lily's. But here he was, lying on my table, eyes sunken like he'd been waiting for me. I stepped back, my hip knocking over a tray of embalming tools. They clattered to the floor, the sound too loud in the silent room. My breath hitched, and I swear Tom's eyes twitched, just for a split second, like he was looking at me. I blinked, and they were still again, lifeless. My hands shook as I zipped the bag back up, the Polaroid of Lily burning in my pocket. This wasn't right. Tom was dead. I'd been at his funeral, seen his widow break down. I checked the log again. No name, no record of how this body got here. The cold in the room felt alive now, curling around me like smoke from that warehouse fire. I wanted to run, but my boots felt glued to the tile. Something was watching. And it wasn't Tom. I don't know why I said it. Maybe it was shock. Maybe it was guilt. But as I stared at that body bag, Tom's face burned into my mind. I whispered, "Tom." My voice barely carried, but it broke the silence like a gunshot. Rule 1, never speak the names of the dead. The words from the plaque flashed in my head. Too late. The fluorescent lights above flickered, then died completely. The room plunged into darkness, the kind that feels solid, like it could swallow you whole. A low creak came from freezer unit 5, the one across the room. I fumbled for my flashlight, my heart hammering so loud I could barely hear my own thoughts. The beam cut through the black, landing on the unit's handle. It was moving, inching open, the metal groaning like it was in pain. I hadn't touched it. No one had. The log said Unit 5 was empty. My mouth went dry, and I backed toward the door, the flashlight shaking in my grip. The creak stopped, leaving a sliver of darkness where the freezer door hung ajar. Something inside shifted, a faint rustle, like fabric against steel. I bolted. The coated door slammed behind me as I stumbled up the stairs, my boots slipping on the icy steps. I didn't stop until I was in the chapel's lobby. panting. The Polaroid crumpled in my fist. Daylight streamed through the windows, weak and gray, but it felt like salvation. I didn't go back down until Hargrove showed up an hour later, his cigarette already lit. I told him what happened, Tom's face, the name, the freezer. His eyes darkened, and he stubbed out his cigarette on the desk. You woke something. Everhart. You said a name, and it heard you. He dragged me back to cold room B. The lights were back on, too bright, like they were mocking me. Unit 5 was closed, but Tom's body wasn't in Unit 3 anymore. It was in Unit 1. The bag unzipped just enough to show his face. His eyes open now, staring at the ceiling. Hargrove didn't say another word, just handed me the log and walked out. I checked the security footage later. It showed me saying Tom's name, the lights going out, but nothing else. No freezer opening, no movement, just me, alone, whispering to the dead. I couldn't look at Tom's body again. Not after those eyes stared up from Unit 1 like they knew me. I spent the morning in the chapel's break room, nursing black coffee that tasted like motor oil, trying to convince myself I'd imagined it. Hargrove's warning, you woke something, kept looping in my head. But I clung to logic. I was tired, stressed, haunted by Lily's Polaroid still tucked in my pocket. That's all it was. Grief playing tricks. Then I checked the intake log for the day's work, and my stomach dropped. A new body had been logged in cold room B, slotted into Unit 6. No name, no coroner's report, no paperwork, just a scribbled note in Hargrove's shaky handwriting. Received 3A. Cause unknown. I checked with the office assistant, a nervous kid named Becca, who spent most of her shifts scrolling X on her phone. She swore no delivery came in overnight. I called the county coroner's office. They had no record of sending anyone. My hands were clammy as I headed downstairs, the coded door to cold room B hissing open like it was waiting for me. The room was colder than ever, the air thick with that chemical tang of formalin. The steel plaque on the wall seemed to watch me. Rule 5 glaring. Do not open a sealed body bag. The bag in Unit 6 was sealed, the zipper locked tight with a plastic tag. I should have left it alone, called Hargrove, done anything but what I did. But I needed answers. The bolt cutters in my toolbox made quick work of the tag, the zipper rasping as I pulled it down. I stopped breathing. The face inside was mine, same jawline, same faint scar on my chin from a bar fight in my 20s. But the eyes were wrong. Wide open, glassy, screaming without sound. The mouth was frozen in a rictus grin, like it knew something I didn't. I stumbled back, the Polaroid falling from my pocket to the floor. Lily's face stared up from it, her smile a knife in my chest. The lights flickered, and for a moment, I thought I heard her voice, faint, calling Daddy from somewhere deep in the room. I zipped the bag shut, my hands shaking so bad I could barely grip the metal. This wasn't grief. This wasn't a prank. Cold room B was doing something to me, and it had my face. I locked the door and swore I'd never come back down alone. But as I climbed the stairs, I felt the cold follow me, clinging like damp cloth. Hargrove found me in the lobby, pacing like a caged animal. I told him about the unlogged body, the face, my face staring from the bag. He didn't look surprised, just tired, like he'd heard this story before. He lit a cigarette, ignoring the no smoking sign, and motioned me to his office. It was a cluttered mess. Stacks of yellowed paperwork, a rotary phone, and a photo of a younger Hargrove in a mortician's apron, standing outside the chapel. "Sit," he said, exhaling smoke. "You need to know why Cold Room B is sealed." He told me the room was shut down in 1997 after 3 morticians vanished in a single month. The town called it the Dunmere disappearances, blamed everything from serial killers to bad luck. But locals whispered about a presence tied to an 1870s cholera epidemic that filled the morgue with bodies. "They say the dead didn't stay dead," Hargrove said, his voice flat. "Not in that room. The rules were made to keep it contained." I laughed, a hollow sound even to me. "You expect me to believe that?" Hargrove's eyes narrowed. "You saw your own face down there. Everhart. You tell me what's real." He stubbed out his cigarette and told me to talk to Sheriff Delaney, who'd worked as a mortuary assistant in '97. I found Delaney at the diner across from the chapel, a grizzled man nursing a coffee. I asked about the disappearances. His face went pale, his hands gripping the mug so tight I thought it'd crack. "Don't dig into that," he said, eyes darting away. Some things Dunmere's better off forgetting. But his silence said more than his words. The town was hiding something, and Cold Room B was its heart. That night, I couldn't shake the image of my own dead face. I kept Lily's Polaroid on the table, staring at it like it could explain everything. The cold from the room lingered in my bones, and I swore I heard tapping from the walls of my apartment, faint but relentless, like it was following me home. I couldn't stop seeing my own face in that body bag. Those wide, glassy eyes staring like they knew my secrets. Cold Room B was unraveling me, but I had to keep working. Bills don't pay themselves, and Dunmere wasn't exactly bursting with job prospects. I told myself it was just stress, the Polaroid of Lily messing with my head. But every time I stepped into that basement, the cold felt personal, like it was clawing at the hole Lily's death left in me. That afternoon, I was scheduled to embalm a body from Unit 2, a retiree named Margaret Klein. Natural causes. Routine. I prepped the table, the familiar smell of formalin sharp in the air. The process was second nature. Drain the blood, pump in the chemicals, stitch it up. But as I made the first incision, something was wrong. Blood welled up, bright red, fresh, like I'd cut into a living person. My hands froze. Formalin should have preserved her, turned her veins dry. I checked the pump full. Working fine. I tried again. Deeper. More blood. Pooling on the table. Dripping to the floor with a soft pat, pat, pat. My stomach churned. This wasn't possible. I stepped back, wiping sweat from my brow despite the freezing room. The lights buzzed louder, like a swarm of insects. I glanced at the steel plaque. Rule 5 mocking me. Do not open a sealed body bag. I hadn't opened Margaret's bag. She came in prepped, but now I wished I'd checked it closer. I forced myself to finish, pumping extra formalin, my hands shaking as I sutured her shut. I locked her back in Unit 2, double-checking the latch, and headed for the stairs. That's when I heard a low groan. Not mechanical, not the building settling. It came from behind the freezers, raw and human, like someone fighting for air. I spun around, my flashlight beam darting across the room. Nothing, just steel and shadows. But the groan came again, louder. From Unit 2, I yanked the door open. heart pounding. Margaret's body was still, her chest unmoving. But as I leaned closer, her ribs twitched, a faint rise and fall, like she was breathing. I slammed the door shut, my breath coming in ragged gasps. In my panic, I didn't check the other units. Rule 3. Close freezer units in numerical order. I'd left Unit 2 open, the cold spilling out like a warning. I ran, the coded door clanging behind me, the groan echoing in my ears. Lily's Polaroid felt heavier in my pocket, like it was pulling me back down. The next morning, I dragged myself back to Cold Room B, dreading what I'd find. I hadn't slept. Every creak in my apartment sounded like that groan. Every shadow felt like those glassy eyes from the unlogged corpse. Hargrove was already in the chapel, his cigarette smoke curling under the fluorescent lights. I didn't tell him about the breathing. He'd think I was losing it, and maybe I was, but I couldn't shake the feeling that the room was playing with me, using Lily's memory like bait. I checked the freezers, expecting Margaret in Unit 2. She wasn't there. Instead, Unit 1 held her body, the bag unzipped just enough to show her face. Her eyes open now, staring blankly. Tom's body was in Unit 3, not Unit 1 where I'd left him. The unlogged corpse, my face, was in Unit 6, its bag open, mouth twisted in that same silent scream. Every body had been moved, rearranged like pieces on a chessboard. I checked the log. The security footage, nothing. No one had been in here overnight. My violation of Rule 3, leaving the freezer open, had done something. As I stood there, the air grew heavier, the cold biting deeper. A dusty mirror in the corner caught my eye, its surface smudged with years of neglect. I don't know why I looked, but I did. My reflection was there, but behind me was a shadow, tall and featureless. No face, just a void where eyes should have been. I spun around, my flashlight sweeping the room. Empty. When I looked back, the shadow was gone. My pocket felt warm, and I pulled out Lily's Polaroid. Tucked behind it was a child's drawing, crude crayon lines forming a stick figure labeled Daddy in her handwriting. I hadn't put it there. The cold wrapped around me, and I heard it again, that faint tapping, like fingernails on steel, coming from the walls. I was unraveling. The rearranged bodies, the breathing corpse, the crayon drawing of Daddy in Lily's handwriting. It was too much. Cold Room B wasn't just a morgue. It was a trap, and I was caught in it. I stopped sleeping, kept Lily's Polaroid under my pillow like it could protect me. Hargrove's cryptic stories about the 1997 disappearances gnawed at me, so I started digging. The chapel had a storage closet in the attic, a dusty tomb of forgotten files and equipment. I spent my lunch break there, sifting through boxes of moldy paperwork and broken embalming tools, looking for anything to explain what was happening. Buried under a pile of old invoices was a metal lockbox, rusted but heavy. Inside were 3 VHS tapes, labeled Dunmere Funeral Chapel, 1997 in faded marker. My hands shook as I carried them to the office, where an ancient VCR sat in the corner, hooked to a grainy TV. I popped in the first tape, expecting routine footage, maybe old training videos. Instead, it showed Cold Room B, almost identical to now, except the steel plaque looked newer, the rules freshly carved. A young mortician, barely out of his 20s, was working alone, his face tight with nerves, He muttered something about stupid rules and turned on an AM radio. Static crackled. Then a voice whispered his name. He froze. Just like I had, the tape glitched, the screen warping. The mortician's voice turned to a scream as something yanked him toward freezer unit 4. The door slammed shut, and the footage cut to static. When it cleared, the room was empty, but the plaque was in focus. A new scratch appeared, forming words. Don't let them remember. My heart stopped. I rewound, paused, and leaned closer. The mortician's face, it was Hargrove, younger. His eyes wide with the same fear I'd seen in him yesterday. How the hell had he survived? Or had he? The tape ended with a flicker, and for a split second, my own face flashed on the screen. Distorted, screaming. I yanked the plug from the wall, the TV hissing into darkness. The cold from downstairs seemed to seep into the attic, and I swore I heard Lily's voice, faint, calling from the stairwell. I couldn't go back to cold room B, not after the tape, but I had to. The chapel was my job, my lifeline in this dead-end town. I told myself I'd stick to the rules, keep my head down. But the rules were breaking me. That afternoon, I was prepping an unclaimed body, a veteran. No family. Just a John Doe with a dog tag and a pocket watch. Tarnished but heavy. The kind you'd pass down to a son. Rule 7 burned in my mind. Never take personal items from a corpse. But something in me snapped. Maybe it was Lily's drawing. Maybe it was Hargrove's face on that tape. But I slipped the watch into my pocket. It felt like defiance, like I could take something back from this place. That night, I was home, the watch on my nightstand. My apartment was a dump above a shuttered hardware store, the kind of place where the walls creaked and the heat barely worked. At exactly 3:33 the watch started chiming. A slow, deliberate tick that didn't match its broken hands. I sat up, my breath visible in the dark. The security app on my phone pinged an alert from the chapel's cameras. I opened it, heart pounding. The feed showed Cold Room B, Unit 6 swinging open. The bag with my face inside unzipped. No one was there. The watch kept chiming. Louder, like a heartbeat. I grabbed it, and it burned my hand. Hot as a coal. Outside, snow crunched under footsteps that led nowhere. I checked the window, nothing but fresh powder. But when I turned back, the Polaroid of Lily was on the floor. A new crayon mark scrawled across her face. Daddy, don't. I didn't want to go back to the chapel. Not after the watch burned my hand. Not after seeing my own face in that body bag. Not after Lily's Polaroid was defaced with that crayon scrawl. Daddy, don't. But I had no choice. The job was all I had left, and quitting felt like letting whatever was in Cold Room B win. I kept the watch in my pocket, its ticking a constant reminder of my mistake. The Polaroid stayed under my pillow, but I checked it every hour, terrified it'd change again. When I got to the chapel, Hargrove was gone. His office was a mess, cigarette butts scattered on the desk, coffee mug tipped over, a smear of something dark red trailing from his chair to the floor. My stomach lurched. I followed the trail to the basement door, the coded lock already open, the keypad flashing erratically. A note was taped to the steel plaque, written in Hargrove's shaky scrawl. The ink smudged like blood. I held it back for 50 years. You won't last a week. The plaque itself was shattered. The rules splintered into jagged fragments, unreadable. The cold from Cold Room B seeped through the open door, thicker than ever, like it was breathing. I called Hargrove's cell. No answer. I tried the sheriff, but Delaney's voicemail kicked in. His voice clipped, like he was dodging me. Becca, the office assistant, hadn't seen Hargrove since yesterday. I stood at the threshold of Cold Room B, the red smear leading inside. Stopping at the edge of the tile, my flashlight beam caught something glinting in the corner. A cigarette lighter. Hargrove's, engraved with his initials. I picked it up. The metal warmed despite the freezing air. The freezers were silent, but the cold felt alive, pulsing, like it was waiting for me to step inside. I didn't. I locked the door and spent the day in the lobby, pretending to do paperwork, but really just watching the basement door, expecting it to swing open. That night, my apartment felt wrong. The watch ticked louder, even when I stuffed it in a drawer. The walls creaked, and the snow outside seemed to whisper. Miles. I checked the Polaroid again. Lily's face was still there, but the crayon mark had spread, a jagged line across her eyes, like someone was erasing her. I clutched it, my chest tight with the same panic I felt the night she died, when I stood helpless as flames swallowed our home. Hargrove was gone, and I knew Cold Room B had taken him. I just didn't know why it wanted me next. I couldn't avoid Cold Room B forever. The next morning, I forced myself downstairs, the lighter and Polaroid in my pocket like talismans. The coded door was unlocked again, swinging open before I touched it. The cold hit me like a wave, sharp and heavy, carrying that familiar sting of Lily's absence. The shattered plaque lay in pieces on the floor, the rules reduced to rubble. I stepped inside, my boots echoing in the silence. The freezers were closed, but the air felt wrong, charged, like the moment before a lightning strike. Then I heard it, a low murmur, like a crowd whispering in unison. It came from the freezers. I gripped Hargrove's lighter, my thumb on the flint, ready to run. The murmur grew louder, forming a single word. Miles, my name, over and over. From every unit, the doors rattled, then opened, one by one, without a sound. The bodies inside stood upright, their bags unzipped, eyes open, staring at me. Tom, Margaret, the corpse, with my face, they were all there, motionless but alive in a way that made my skin crawl. They didn't attack, didn't move. They just whispered, their voices blending into a plea. Sew us shut. Don't let us remember. A smaller figure stepped forward from Unit 4, her red jacket unmistakable. Lily. Her face was pale, her eyes hollow, but it was her. She reached out, her voice a broken whisper. Daddy? Sew me shut. Don't let me remember. My knees buckled. I wanted to hold her, to save her, but the cold tightened around me, and I knew she wasn't my Lily anymore. The 8th rule from the VHS burned in my mind. Don't let them remember. I'd broken every rule, and now they were awake, tied to me, to Lily, to the guilt I'd carried for a decade. I couldn't save Lily. Not 10 years ago when the fire took her, and not now, when Cold Room B brought her back as something else. Her voice, Daddy, sew me shut, echoed in my skull, blending with the whispers of the other bodies, their eyes pleading, their mouths moving without sound. I'd broken every rule on that shattered plaque, and now the dead were awake, tethered to me by my guilt, my memories, my name. I quit that day, left my keys on Hargrove's desk, and drove back to my apartment, the Polaroid of Lily clutched in my hand. The crayon marks across her face had spread, blacking out her eyes. But I couldn't let her go. Not again. I set up my old camcorder in the attic, the only place that felt safe from the cold that followed me. The snow outside pounded the windows, a whiteout that made Dunmere feel like it was erasing itself. I recorded my story, every detail, the radio, Tom's face, my own face in that body bag, Hargrove's disappearance, Lily's plea. My voice cracked as I spoke, the whiskey in my mug doing nothing to stop the shaking. I broke the rules, I said to the lens, and now something's awake. It knows my name, it knows her name, and it's waiting for me to close my eyes. I didn't know who would find the tape, but I had to warn them. Cold Room B wasn't just a morgue. It was a cage for something older than Dunmere, something that fed on memory, on names, on the things we can't let go. I kept seeing Lily's face, not the smiling girl from the county fair, but the hollow thing in the freezer, begging me to sew her shut. I'd failed her once. I couldn't fail her again. I thought about going back, burning the chapel down like I couldn't save my house all those years ago. But I was too afraid. The cold was in me now, in my bones, my dreams. A week later, I heard the chapel had a new mortician, some kid from Rochester, cocky, fresh out of mortuary school, probably laughing at the small town superstitions like I did. I drove by one last time, the Polaroid in my pocket, Hargrove's lighter in the other. The chapel looked the same, its brick facade swallowing the weak sunlight. I didn't go inside. I couldn't. But I saw the kid through the window, clipboard in hand, heading for the basement. I wanted to scream at him to run, to burn the rules and never look back. Instead, I drove away, the snow covering my tracks. I got a call from Becca, the office assistant. A few days later, she sounded nervous, her voice low. The new guy found the plaque, she said. It's fixed, but there's only 6 rules now. The 7th, it's scratched out, like someone clawed it off. I froze, my breath catching. Before I could ask, she whispered, "There's something else." I heard it last night, from Cold Room B, a voice. It said, "Rewrite them. One more must die." The line went dead. I checked the security app I still had access to, my hands shaking as I opened the feed. The camera showed Cold Room B, the freezers lined up, the new plaque gleaming. Unit 6 was open, a body bag inside, the tag clear even in the grainy footage. Miles Everhart. The zipper twitched, like something inside was trying to get out. The screen cut to static, but not before I heard it a faint whisper. Lily's voice, saying, "Daddy, you didn't sew me shut."